Welcome to episode 75 of Blind Squirrel Macro the Pod, the audio edition of my weekly newsletter. This week, eye-watering vet bills and iPad guy tradies trigger a refocus on the opaque world of private assets. Time to revisit Team Saddlebags. The Squirrel is coming to you on the morning of Monday, the 24th of February, Melbourne time. Quick reminder, as ever, to make sure you get the show notes for charts and links. Plenty in there this week, and if you don't have them already, fix that right now by signing up for free at blindsquirrelmacro.com. First up, everything in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is categorically not investment advice. Before making any investment decisions, for heaven's sakes, don't listen to a cartoon rodent. Talk to a financial advisor. Well, as I said, it's time to check back in on Team Saddlebags. The Squirrel's nickname, riffing on Tom Wolfe's Man in Full, Charlie Croker, for the private asset industrial complex. That's private equity, private credit, real estate and infrastructure. It's been a pretty crazy week for the Squirrels. We've just moved house, and I wrote this week's note after 3 days of lugging boxes and deciphering assembly instructions for flat-pack furniture. Pour out a large scotch for the Squirrel. Tough enough on its own, but complicated by several mercy missions to the local vet with poor old Gnu, our elderly schnoodle. The nicest work of Gnature in the zoo for those that get the Flanders and Swan or Muppet Show reference. Anyway, the old boy has been in the wars over the last couple of years. Thankfully this week he fell ill during regular office hours, and I was able to take him to our wonderful local vet, where these days he definitely sports double platinum frequent flyer status. In Melbourne, if your four-legged friends get sick at the weekend, you are faced with dealing with the mafiosi, those private equity-owned chains of 24-hour emergency vet clinics. 2 years ago, when Gnu first came down with pancreatitis, the root cause of his current ailments, he was struck down late on a Saturday afternoon. By Sunday evening, his bar tab at the clinic was running well into 5 digits of South Pacific pesos, and that was without any surgery. I feel bad for those impeccably trained, animal-loving vets and veterinary nurses. These days, it's clear from the looks in their eyes that they feel sick about charging those exorbitant fees. But alas, they are now in the billing targets business. They're in the same game as those iPad guys from the private equity roll-ups in the trades. You know the ones, plumbers, HVAC engineers and electricians. Earlier last week, Google AdWords had directed Mrs. Squirrel to an electrician for a quote to replace some light fixtures in the new house. She rightly showed the iPad guy the door with a flea in his ear after his tablet spat out an absurd estimate for a 60-minute job. We got precisely the same thing done for 25% of iPad guy's crazy estimate with the Squirrel's favourite local Sparky, once he finally responded to my texts. The iPad guy business model counts on the idiot that blindly accepts the quote, just like the car owner that underuses his car wash membership. It is, however, very different when man's best friend is bleeding out. Sadly, private equity is responsible for the enshittification of so many things in our daily lives these days, and the Squirrel reckons it's about to become a noisier problem for the industry. Consumers and politicians are finally joining the dots. Now, I've had my eye on big privates for a while now. During 2023, we played the theme with a short position in financial intermediaries, principally Goldman, that would suffer in a world of reduced deal activity by the financial sponsor community. That trade worked really well, and we took it off as we prepared to focus on larger prey. The rodent's plan to take on Omar in late 2023 was put on hold before we even could put it on by the Fed's Halloween pivot, and we've spectated with slack jaw as Blackstone casually tacked on $90 billion of market cap in the intervening period between then and now. I had another look at Blackstone's share price versus the US 10-year yields as a chart in the show notes. Rates would appear not to matter for now, but you would have thought that the shares of one of the largest users of the credit market would be much more sensitive to changes in long-term interest rates. Yet the shares of Blackstone, as well as its big private peers like Apollo, KKR and Carlyle, have largely ignored the bond market in the past 2 years. Why is that? Well, the world's endowments and pension funds cannot stop, neither do they seemingly intend to stop, pouring assets into the asset class. For now. Not content with conventional fundraising targets, the giant asset gatherers are targeting assets from the insurance market now, and even retail via ETFs, which is a crazy idea. Big privates are doing such a good job at raising money that they are basically having to morph into unregulated banks in order to deploy their groaning AUM. They're already taking massive market share in investment-grade direct lending and are now even muscling in on the syndicated loan market. So what, Squirrel, I hear you ask? Well, the problem is that all this frantic deal-making away from the scrutiny and daylight of public markets is obscuring a noticeable deterioration in asset quality. It feels as though private markets are doing deals that are in a more heavily scrutinized public market they wouldn't have got away with. They'd have been turned down. And when these deals don't work, they're being aggressively photoshopped. Euphemistically sounding LMEs, liability management exercises, sound a lot more palatable than the old school parlance of extend and pretend. Check out the notes, there's some really good stats in there. Meanwhile, Howard Marks, arguably the market's most celebrated distressed debt investor, quietly sets the record for the largest ever fundraise of that ilk, 16 yards of the stuff. Presumably, it was a similar set of investors to those chasing fund number 17 from Big PE and the golden age of private credit that provided Mr. Marks with his latest war chest. Do these LPs really not suppose that those funds will largely be deployed in buying assets from private deals they already have exposure to, and guess what, for pennies in the dollar? Or is that only what happens to the other guys' deals? Therein lies the rub. At some stage, the endowment CIOs, pension advisors and allocators are going to realize that this is a real headache. Private credit cannot, at that scale, pivot into distressed investing in the way that they pivoted in the past from LBOs to larger asset pools like investment grade and infrastructure credit. By definition, the market for investing in credit assets at those pennies in the dollar is a lot smaller. Without a limitless addressable market, the fundraising machine inevitably grinds to a halt. Ever since becoming public companies, PE shops have struggled to persuade the market to assign a decent multiple to their performance fees. The multiple assigned to the base management fees has expanded over time, but the name of the game has 100% been about the business of asset gathering. Big private asset already dominates the largest asset pools. Attempts to grow AUM by further encroaching onto the territory of commercial banks may be challenging in an environment in which the banks look to face less regulatory scrutiny. The new US administration has populist tendencies and came to power with a mandate to tame inflation rather than stoke culture wars. As discussed earlier, the antics of much private equity activity is both inflationary and decidedly unpopular. Even the compensation model is under attack. Apparently Trump wants to close the carried interest loophole. The American Investment Council, Big Private's elite lobbying unit, looks set for a very busy 2025. The tide looks to be turning for the industry. In section 2 of the letter this week, we looked at how the Squirrel is positioning to capitalize on a potentially sweaty time for Team Saddlebags. An extract to close from Tom Wolfe's A Man in Full for those that weren't familiar with the references. The sweat patch under his arms had converged and were now running down his sides, forming a pair of saddlebags on his shirt front. They were the size of 2 dinner plates, and they were darkening the fabric of his white shirt. The bankers stared at the saddlebags of sweat on Charlie Croker's shirt front. One of them whispered to another, "Is he melting?" The other replied, "No, it's worse. He's evaporating." Come and join us at blindsquirrelmacro.com. You can also find me on Twitter at squirrelmacro and on Blue Sky at blindsquirrel. Thanks for listening. Please do the rate and share thing. Squirrel out.